In this lecture, we're going to talk about server status. It's a command that is run on a MongoDB or a MongoOS. It's one of the more misunderstood commands, and we'll get into why that is later on. It was mentioned by Dwight as part of M102, and it is basically at the core of what the MMS agent runs in order to gather statistics. You invoke it very simply. You can just run db.serverStatus like so, and we'll just quickly switch over to a terminal and show you what that sort of output looks like. Here's server status for one of the primaries in our replica set that we've been using for most of this module. You can see we're running version 2.4.8, what the process ID is, uptime, and some various other general information, how many asserts. Now, similar to what we saw with the system tools, with netstat and others, these are going to be cumulative counters. So what the MMS agent is doing is running this command and a few others once a minute and recording the current value of these counters and then diffing them against the previous value, and thereby getting how many flushes there have been in the last 60 seconds. It's almost always going to be one. How long those have taken, and the last value here is how long the last one took. So, for example, in terms of asserts, which is a nice easy one, let's imagine that all 5 of these user asserts that have been recorded here happened in the last minute. It would record user asserts 5, it would look back at the previous value, which would have been 0, and there would have been 5 in that minute. So you would have gotten 5 per minute, and with the average per second, you would have divided 5 by 16, getting something along the lines of 0.08 rate per second, so very low for the entire minute. Obviously a value of 60 here versus 0 before would have given you 1 per second on average. This is a very long command, lots and lots of sort of nested documents here. But you can see as you start to scroll down, you'll see things that are quite familiar to you from the previous module when we were looking at the various stats that are available to you in MMS. The background flushing is there, the connections, how many are currently open, how many are available. This is a function of the U limit. So there were 14 in use, 20,000 is the hard-coded maximum, so 14 from 20,000, 19,986. Total created, there have been 2,083 created. So the diff between how many have been created here and the next sample will determine how many connections were created for that minute. Cursors, total open, you've got some dur. Now dur is short for durabilities. This is all related to the journal. So the journal is how durability is basically implemented in MongoDB, and so there's various statistics here about the journal. You'll easily recognize the journaled megabytes here. That's the one that's going to actually feed into the MMS stat for how much is being written to the journal. Here's the page faults, and you see there's a note in here. It's under extra info, and a note fields vary by platform. And why is that? Well, it actually turns out that various different operating systems will have different ways of reporting what a page fault actually is. In Linux, you've basically got 2 categories. You've got a soft page fault and a hard page fault. We'll be talking about the difference between those two when we get to some more detail on the memory side of things later on. But in other operating systems, you can have many different levels of page fault. I think there are at least 6 in Windows, for example, things like that. So this extra information here can vary on platform basically based on what the server is aware of and what it puts into server status. Next up, you'll see that there's global locks, some counters related to the indexes. So you'll see 0 misses here, how many times you've been hitting, that kind of thing. Next we're into locks, the global lock in the admin database, local database, config, test. You'll have one in there for basically every database that you've got because it's a per database lock. So you'll notice that even though we don't graph these out, all of this data is being gathered by MMS, and so you should be able to give more granularity into locking and various sort of things and alarming on some of these things later on. But for now, there's a subset of the data that's in here is actually made available in MMS. More as we scroll down will be very familiar to you. Op counters, REPL, record stats. These are all feeding into stats in MMS and MMS monitoring. We got memory, got the resident memory value, the virtual memory value, the mapped memory value. Again, all these feeding into those graphs over time that are available in MMS monitoring. And here's some that aren't. So there's some moves, there's some interesting information about the replication, about the oplog itself. And then finally, right down the bottom, one of the more recent features implemented TTL collections, which we don't have enabled. So even though it's gone and passed through 503 times, so basically once a minute, there have been no deleted documents. So the TTL thread, which watches and makes sure that anything with a time to live is deleted, has basically not been doing any work. Now, I mentioned at the start of this that server status is one of the most misunderstood commands, misunderstood metrics out there. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Because this is being run at least once a minute for any host that's in MMS, potentially more than that depending on what else you've got monitoring and what else is going on there. Server status is being run very regularly, and because of that it shows up when the system is slow. And the classic way it will show up is something like this. I'm just pasting this in here for convenience. It's obviously not going to run as a command, but I'm just pasting it in here so it's easily seen. So this is a log file line from a MongoD, and what it's saying is server status was very slow. It gives us some more metrics about when it was slow, right? So in this case, running pretty fast until it hit record stats, and sometime around there when it was trying to gather record stats and then REPL, and then at the end it got slow. Now that doesn't mean there was a particular problem getting, say, record stats. In fact, this could have shown up anywhere in the sort of list of values. It could have been global lock. The vast majority of the time, in fact I've never seen it be anything else, this is just a symptom. It is not a cause. Server status is showing up as very slow, and it will show up every minute as very slow in a system that's under load, simply because the system is under load and this has been run on a regular basis. Other things will seem to show up much less frequently, and that's just simply because they're not being run as often, or perhaps they're only occasionally being slow. Whereas server status, it's gathering a lot of information, it's running a command, it's parsing all this information back out, preparing it and sending it to MMS, and it has to list out quite a number of fields. So it's not completely lightweight. So if there is something bogging down the system, server status is probably going to be slow, and then flag that to you as part of a slow operation in the logs. Because of that behavior, it is often reported as a problem. Why is server status reporting is very slow all the time? What is wrong with server status? When in fact what it's actually telling you is your system is slow, and this is just a symptom of that slowness.